Hi, I'm Evilise Page, and thanks for listening to the Believe Big podcast, the show where we take a deep dive into your healing with health experts, integrative practitioners, biblical faith leaders, and cancer thrivers from around the globe. Welcome to today's episode on the Believe Big podcast. My name is Evilise Page, and I'm grateful to be with you today. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome to the Believe Big podcast, Nick Pineault, the EMF Guy. Nick is the #1 best-selling author of The Non-Tinfoil Guide to EMFs and an advocate for safe technologies. Through his unconventional approach, blending humor, science, and common sense, he's becoming a leading voice on the topic of electromagnetic pollution and how it affects our health. For the last few years, Nick has been interviewing some of the best minds on health and technology and facilitating the creation of courses and educational materials to raise awareness on this very important issue. You can find out more about Nick, the EMF Guy, on his website, theemfguy.com. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, we always like to start our podcast with our guest's favorite health tip, and I'm sure you have many, but can you share one with us?
Sure. The first thing I would say is turn off your technology before going to sleep. And that's not just because the cell phone is a source of distraction. Of course, if you get a notification in the middle of the night, the buzzes, the rings, and even if you put it on silent mode, a lot of people are distracted by the fact that there are notifications waiting for you. So that's a bit distraction in it itself. But also the radiation emitted by your phone, even though it is at a relatively low level, right? It doesn't, cook an egg or anything like that. That's an internet myth. Actually, there are great reasons to think that radio frequency radiation emitted by your phone, or it could be a Bluetooth device, or it could even be your Wi-Fi router, that it disrupts sleep. And there's actually a good study. I was just looking it up while you were introducing me right then and there. It's a 4-week randomized double-blind crossover trial of 12 healthy adults. And they said, yes, we do think that the radiation emitted by phones or Bluetooth or Wi-Fi may impact sleep in some people. And some people are more impacted than their spouse, which makes it, very, very frustrating because, of course, you might be impacted by your phone and maybe your spouse isn't and they sleep just fine. So there is a variability in how much we're impacted, but it's not like we need more factors interrupting our sleep these days, right? Most people don't sleep enough or have good sleep quality. So my advice is just everything off before bed. And if you cannot turn it off, put your phone in the next room as far away from your pillow as possible.
That's great advice. I keep mine in the kitchen, but my husband does keep his in our room, but he puts it on airplane mode. What do you feel about airplane mode and having it in your room?
Airplane mode is good. Okay. Yes, I think it's great. Like you said, the alarm clock functions just fine on airplane mode. I use my alarm on my phone. The problem I have with it is some people will charge their phone right next to their pillow or underneath the pillow. And that's another source of electricity, which is a different type of EMF radiation you might be getting. It's not ideal. So arm's length from the pillow would be preferable if you charge it. So keeping it at a distance. And also, it's becoming increasingly complicated, this airplane mode question with phones, because the manufacturers are not necessarily interested in having you use your phone less. To the contrary, the manufacturers want you to be addicted and glued to these devices. So unfortunately, it comes with more and more radiation exposure. So if you're trying to minimize radiation exposure, you're kind of fighting against the entire society at the moment and how big tech is evolving. And if you choose to do that, you just have to make sure that on airplane mode, you also have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth turned off. And it means that on your phone, you're going to see a bunch of icons. The Wi-Fi and Bluetooth have to be crossed off, which means they're off. You can be on airplane mode and then on Wi-Fi at the same time, which is another source of radio frequency radiation. So in fact, your phone can emit 4 distinct types of radio frequency radiation. Now, obviously, these smartphones are I don't know if they're smart. One thing is sure, it's a supercomputer, right, in a tiny format. So that's why it's becoming more complicated for me to say, oh, just hit airplane mode. I have to explain it all and give context. And if people get confused, I tell them as far away as possible from your pillow. And that works. Even if it's open, the radiation reaching you will have dropped off by 99.99999%, which is not nothing. However, it's way better and preferable than just having it right next to your head.
Yeah, we had Dr. Deborah Davis from the Environmental Health Trust on our show probably a year ago. And her big quote was, "Distance is your friend." And
For sure.
I just remember that. So by you saying that, it's true. Distance is our friend. And I know there are many listeners that may not be familiar with electromagnetic fields like we are, EMFs. Can you just start by just briefly explaining what EMFs are and where we commonly encounter them in our daily lives?
In the scope of my work, I'm talking about EMFs, really the human-made EMFs. There's a vast difference between the electromagnetic spectrum in nature that we have always been exposed to, for example, the visible light spectrum. Even that could come with its set of problems, because if we use human-made light, we might cause an environment to become poorly conclusive with great sleep. For example, if you use very bright lights at night, like I'm doing now for this interview, for example, and you blast yourself in the eyes, and then you look at your devices and laptop and phone before bed, we know that this human-made type of light will impact your biology. It will prevent your body from going into sleep mode. And some people actually can have sleep problems with it, or just have a poor quality of sleep as a result. There's also types of human-made fields or types of radiation-emitting devices that emit fields that are invisible, such as your phone, such as Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and also household electricity. And it's not because we've been using them for decades that they're necessarily safe. And that's always the part that is very debatable in science, is what is safe, what is unsafe. Well, consider the fact that our safety standards and the way your phone is tested is short term, and we never use a phone short term. We use them now our entire lifespan, right? And consider that the only thing they are looking at is heating effects. So it means that if you are overheating your brain or overheating certain parts of your body, for example, in the case of man overheating, your genitalia will cause a loss in fertility, and that's known as just a change of temperature. So these are concerns. However, there are other concerns that happen even without heating, including oxidative stress or reduction of your ability to repair. And another one is a shift in your brain waves, for example, which is probably why radiofrequency radiation will interfere with your sleep. It's not that it's instantly killing you or damaging you in a way that could be compared to other toxins where you become very sick within a few minutes, but it's over time. Imagine if every night you have a phone near your head and every night your brain waves aren't quite where they should be to have deep sleep. Well, over the course of a year, you might not notice it, but you would say, well, I don't know, my sleep quality isn't that great. You have many factors that could impact your sleep quality, just everyday life stressors, light, it could be what you eat or don't eat, or supplements or mineral status. A bunch of different things will impact your sleep quality, of course. But if you forget about the phone, then you are missing an important factor, and a factor that can be easily avoided also. And that's kind of the point in this entire discussion, is that if there are no benefits to an exposure, it should be removed. For example, my phone, I don't use it when it's in my pocket. There's no reason I should keep it in my pocket because it would be emitting radiation very close to my body. During sleep is another example. Or are there alternatives where we could do without the radiation? For example, wired alternatives to wireless. So in all these situations, in many situations, people use the wireless technology in a way that is basically as high as reasonably achievable. What we want to achieve is as low as reasonably achievable. So if we consider cell phone radiation and all these EMFs as a sort of stressor, or you might call it toxin, some people think it's too extreme, but if it's a stressor, then why not minimize it to the minimum amount possible? Because we have way enough stressors already from all sorts of things that happen in our life, including many, many environmental toxicants like PFAS and BPA and pesticides and all those that are more in the news. EMFs is rarely in the news, and I think it should be more widely discussed.
Yeah, I completely agree. Since our audience is particularly interested in cancer prevention and healing, can you shed light on any links between EMF exposure and the development or recurrence of cancer?
Yes, it's still debated. There was a review at WHO, the World Health Organization, lately around cancer. The researchers said, oh, we don't believe it's an issue. There are other researchers that say the exact opposite, and that's very concerning. The independent researchers generally talk about cancer risks, and the more science has been developing in the last several years, especially since 2018, a major study came out showing clear evidence that it might be a carcinogen in rats and mice, which is the gold standard to test the toxicity of something that was from the National Toxicology Program. Since then, those same scientists that looked at these results say it's very concerning. We think it should be classified as a class 1 carcinogen. Some scientists are saying that. A class 1 carcinogen, what does it mean? Well, it's a classification by IARC, which is a branch of the WHO, International Agency for Research on Cancer. And there are not many agents in this list of class 1. Class 1 means a definite carcinogen like tobacco smoke or asbestos. So it is serious. Other scientists would say there's no problem. I don't know who to believe, but I tend to trust the scientists that are completely independent from industries that have a bias, of course. So it's still debated. However, there's also a debate in philosophy in what should we do if there's a disagreement on the scientific standpoint. Many activists, doctors that are more on the holistic side of things, a lot of everyday people that are just, I think, attuned to the idea of preventative medicine say, well, if there's a chance that it causes cancer and others say, no, there's no chance, it kind of creates a doubt. So if there's a doubt, we should follow something called the precautionary principle, which states in case of scientific uncertainty or doubt, if there's even a slight chance that we might get it wrong, why not take preventative measures to lower the exposure? And that was a point that has been made by independent scientists for decades at this point. So it's really something the industry does not like because, of course, users will be less likely to use their phone for extended periods of time if they know that the phone is associated with, for example, an increase in brain tumors, an increase in breast tumors, an increase in thyroid tumors, and many other tumors of the head region. Some surgeons I talked to or heard about are convinced that many of their clients' parotid gland tumors, which is the salivary glands, or acoustic neuromas, which are non-carcinogenic. However, they can lead to complications, including being deaf or even dying from it. And also the glioblastomas that are, of course, the most dangerous type of brain tumor you can ever develop. There are many surgeons and doctors that are convinced that we're seeing an increase of the amount of people that come in their clinic with these tumors. Is it true? Is it not true? Well, why not stop having a phone next to your face for extended periods of time? And then in 20 years, I'll be able to tell you whether it was true or not. But in the meantime, we can really get it wrong. And this is really the problem that has been identified by so many people in the environmental movement right now, environmental toxicity movement, I would call it, because environmentalists that are focused on nature tend to get it wrong at the moment. But people that are looking to remove toxins on our food, for example, I think they're getting it very right, where they say if we introduce a new chemical in the environment or on our food, why shouldn't we wait a few years until it makes it to mass market and force manufacturers to test it thoroughly? That's not how it's done, at least not in the US. The EU is a little bit better about that, but with the FDA and the Food and Drug Administration, it's pretty much we roll out the food additive, and then if it's proven dangerous, we will ban it. But it will take decades. So every time it looks like when we change the environment and add new human-made things, we have the opportunity to make things worse. And we don't need to make things worse in the moment when it comes to cancer. And at the same time, I don't want to be alarmist, but it's clear that the cancers are increasing in our youth. And when I say our youth, I mean, I could be part of that. I'm 37, below 40 years old, and in the 20 years old and even teenagers at the moment, it's exploding, especially cancers of the groin area. So it's testicular cancer, colon cancer, ovarian cancer, bladder cancer. And then you ask yourself, is there a link with cell phones in the pocket? Maybe, maybe not, but it's certainly not helping. And when you look at radiofrequency radiation as an agent, it's clear that it might disrupt cellular healing, apoptosis. So there are many ways that it could be a co-carcinogen or simply a carcinogen.
Yeah, and our integrated pediatric oncologists agree with you in that. In the last decade, the increase in pediatric cancer has been 40%. They state that the top 3 reasons are the glyphosate chemicals that have been poured out into our foods that our kids are eating, EMFs and radiation exposure through technologies. And then the third thing is the adjuvants that are in vaccines. And so there's so many things that are increasing these rates. And if we can do one aspect of it and removing as much, we live in this technology world, but we can live in it safely or safer in order that it protects our body in a more efficient way. And some people, like you were saying earlier, report health issues related to EMF exposure, such as headaches and fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
I am one of them. I am one that is super sensitive to it. But what are the most common symptoms of EMF sensitivity, and how serious have you found this to be with your work and conditions?
The real number of people who suffer from these EMF-related symptoms is really unknown. There are indications in the form of surveys, people that self-claim that they are sensitive to this radiation. It will vary from 3% to up to more than 10% in certain countries. So, which is very surprising to me, because I would have thought, maybe this is something for just 0.1% or maybe 1% of all people, but 10% would be massive. Certain scientists say that at this point, they estimate that a third of all adults, for example, might suffer from mild to moderate symptoms associated with electrosensitivity. So, for example, it could impact your energy levels, which is hard to detect because you could be just fatigued for other life reasons. However, if you find yourself in front of a computer with no Wi-Fi, for example, I use my computer on an Ethernet cable, so that's the internet going through a cable instead of through the air, through Wi-Fi. And if you find yourself being way more energetic and less drained at the end of the day, that's an indication. I think that generally speaking, many people find out that they were more impacted than they thought when they eliminate the offending agent. That's often the case with diet changes also, where you say, oh, well, I feel pretty normal. You clean up your diet and stop eating as much, for example, restaurant food, junk food. And all of a sudden you say, I used to feel like crap. I just didn't know. So it means that our perception of our normalcy will vary in time, of course. But when it comes to the symptoms, some others are more telling that people have, an acute effect. A headache when talking on the phone or being near a source of EMFs is very telling. Other people have heart palpitations. Other people might have tinnitus, for example, ringing in the ear. And in fact, certain people have constant ringing in the ear when they are in a certain environment. And that's not initially something very new, because it was known in the military research on radar operators that certain radar operators started complaining, guys, I'm hearing this clicking sound. And they said, well, that's impossible because no one can hear this invisible radiation. They studied it in the 1970s. It turns out, yes, some people can hear this type of radiation, even though it's the reasons are, they identified some possible reasons. I don't know if they've identified exactly the mechanisms. The reality is some people can and some others cannot. But imagine if you could hear all the Wi-Fi. I mean, it's something that could make you literally go crazy in a city, because of course, here in Montreal, if I looked at the list of Wi-Fis, I would find, I don't know, maybe over 300 to 400 just in my neighborhood of people that have a Wi-Fi. Of course, one Wi-Fi per home, per apartment. It's not like most people share it. It's mine and it's password protected. Don't you dare steal my bandwidth. So the reality is that for these people, the tragedy is that living in an urban environment very close to neighbors and to all these exposures is becoming increasingly difficult. And the medical profession is really, really behind on understanding these issues. There are some practitioners that are starting to pick up and see these patients and realize that sometimes by improving your health status, you can lower this impact. But it just seems that for a lot of people, myself included, I was slightly sensitive. And when my health status was in a poor place, I just felt like in front of a computer, I would get this massive brain fog on Wi-Fi. And I would say that right now, if I'm near Wi-Fi, I don't feel it as much. And sometimes I don't feel anything, which is good, but it does not mean it's safer for me, right? It's not because you do not feel glyphosate when you eat your food that you shouldn't avoid it. So avoidance is for everyone, but even I would say more important if you feel it's impacting you with symptoms, of course, because it's not going to go away, quite unfortunately.
Yes, I completely agree. My friends say that I could be an EMF detector because I notice immediately the difference in levels of EMFs. One example that many people aren't aware of is even electric vehicles. I've gotten a Tesla or an electric vehicle, and within a 10-minute drive, I have a migraine headache. My stomach is nauseous. And even my husband, who's not EMF sensitive, he starts getting dizziness and his blood pressure he can feel going up. So what are ways that people who do have electric vehicles, how can they protect their bodies?
It's tough. Electric vehicles, it's kind of a gamble when you purchase a vehicle these days because there are many different types of makes and models. Some gas-powered vehicles have been found to be just as bad on the EMF standpoint compared to the hybrid or electric vehicles. So that's something that I want to clear first. The reality is that all vehicles are moving in a direction where we use more radar systems, more batteries in the case of hybrid and electric vehicles, and more electronic gizmos. So we're literally entering a cage in metal where all these EMFs are concentrated inside. And then people use their phone inside, sometimes two phones. Sometimes you see Uber drivers with like three phones. I don't know why they have multiple, but it's again, as high as possible. It just looks like, okay, well, anything goes because everything is safe. That's not the case. So with electric vehicles, the thing I would say is that if the design of the car is in a way where the batteries are underneath the driver's seat, which is one of the designs that I cannot, tell you the make and models, just verify where the batteries are. They should be in front or in the back, not right next to your body. People don't feel well, and you're just exposed to high levels of magnetic fields because, of course, a strong battery will have a field associated with it. So if you use your car like me, which is I don't own a car, then you're fine. I rent vehicles, for example. So for me, it wouldn't be a priority in my life to mitigate EMFs from a car that much, except if I feel very, very unwell in my car. But if you own a car and you have daily commute up to, 2-3 hours, or even worse, like my dad, you're a realtor and you spend your life in your car, going to clients' visits, and I think he still eats burgers in his car, even though I tried to have him clean up his diet. He's gotten better, but he spends his life in his car. The reality is that he's on the road a lot. Then it becomes a priority for you. If you use your car from time to time, start worrying about your bedroom and your office first, right? So the priorities really go by how many hours are you spending in certain environments, and you try to clean those. It's difficult though, because I'll give you that. Most new cars will have all sorts of features that sometimes can be turned off, like the Wi-Fi hotspots or the Bluetooth options, sometimes not. So if I had to purchase a new car, which I might do in the future, but I'm in Montreal. I use a lot of subway and sometimes the bus. But if I had to purchase a car, I would go to the manufacturer and I would look at what are the options that could be exposing me to EMF. So it could be the Bluetooth in the car dashboard, and you play around. Sometimes it can be turned off, which is great news. And I would buy a car normally without any cellular hotspot. It's not like we need one more hotspot in front of you while you drive. You already have your phone there. So just using your phone in a way that is safer, you could, for example, pre-download a lot of music. Spotify is great for that. You can have offline options when you have pre-downloaded your favorite tracks. You could pre-download podcasts, for example, and then you can make it so that you stay on airplane mode for most of the trip. So there are many ways to lower the exposures that you do have control over.
Yeah, that's excellent. And you can order from the manufacturer, which is kind of what I did. And I declined on the backup cameras and things like that. My husband and my kids, all of them are Jeep Wrangler fans. And so they're basic models that don't have all this lot of technologies with Wi-Fi's, which is really helpful as well, too. But in the last few moments that we have, I'd like for us to go back to two things that you said. Can you share practical tips? The first with how to make your work environment, your office, more EMF friendly or safer. And then the second would be, what are some practical ways that we can make our bedrooms safer and better sleep?
Sure. Yeah, great idea. So the office, it's really the highest source of EMFs is from your computer, right? If you are an office worker like me, I'm an author, I must say, I don't want to say the real number. I mean, over 40 hours in front of this computer. It's a large fraction of my life, even though I try to take breaks and this and that. Overall, if you start a timer each time I'm in front of my computer, you realize that this is one of the important environments. So that's why people in ergonomics would tell you, well, your chair better be as ergonomic as possible because your body will become a chair. Well, the same thing for your computer. What your computer emits, which is Wi-Fi right in front of you, might impact you in a profound way because we're talking about many, many hours of exposure. So that's why I invite everyone to consider having an Ethernet cable that runs from your router to your computer. So if you don't know where your router is, which is where most people are at, start looking into it. Okay, where did they put the router? Is it in my bedroom? Hopefully not, but some people, this is the case. I even had a couple tell me, we realized after reading your book and everything that the Wi-Fi was underneath our bed. So it's really a poor placement. And of course, you want to turn it off. But all that to say that for me, it's very far away. So we had to run a cable. It's not the prettiest thing. We tacked it to the side of the wall. But now we own this place. We might consider running it in the walls, which is another possibility. And you hire an IT company. They come over, it costs a few $100s, and then you have an Ethernet cable running to your computer. What is stellar about this good old, almost, old technology of the cable is that it is stable. And there's no way I would have the ability to stream with this type of camera, which is very high quality, if I had Wi-Fi here. So when I came into this apartment 7 years ago, the Wi-Fi was so poor that I was getting frustrated, right? Oh, darn Wi-Fi, it's always dropping. My quality is poor. I don't look professional and all this. So I started doing EMF interviews. I was getting very frustrated. And at the time, I was just starting to get into EMF mitigation myself because I was just learning about the topic. So when I had the cable plugged in, I realized it's fast and it never drops. So there's an advantage to being cabled, especially when you're in a place where it's stationary, doesn't move. So you don't need Wi-Fi. And then if you need Wi-Fi from time to time, you can just keep Wi-Fi turned off if you never need it. And when you need it, you turn it on, right? That's something that can be done. A lot of people think Wi-Fi needs to be connected 24/7. It's not the case. You can just open it when you need to. And in the meantime, you can just use a good old cable. So that would be the number one thing I would say for the office. And then, of course, a lot of people, especially men, have this phone in their pocket all the time, all day, every day. That's a big mistake. The radio frequency radiation has been, obviously, I told about the fertility risks, but there's also testosterone production. So I know a lot of men in their 50s tell me, oh, fertility risks, I don't mind. I don't want more children. I already have teenagers, or I don't want any children. Well, you do want your testosterone, do you? And then now they freak out. They say, oh my, for sure. Especially as you're aging, you're trying to maintain testosterone, libido, muscle strength, bone strength, and your mind will get impacted if you're low testosterone, you're low drive in life. So it can impact you. And there are many things going against us men for testosterone, and against women for just their hormonal balance, that it's much more difficult to keep these days because of all the hormonal disruptor. Your phone is an endocrine disruptor, guys. It's the same endocrine disruption that can be said from BPA and other plastics can be applied or is caused by your phone. It's just that we don't see it this way. We don't imagine that an invisible signal versus an invisible molecule could have this impact, and yet it does. So your phone, not in your pocket, put it in front of you. Arm's length is okay. And if you expect a call, that's fine. You don't have to stay on airplane mode. Personally, I stay on airplane mode, and then on my computer, I have a VoIP phone. So what it means is that it's an internet phone. You just register for a certain phone number, and people call me on the computer. So that's tremendous. I can talk on a computer, and of course, it doesn't emit any radiation because it's on Ethernet. So that's just another thing to consider. Now, with the cellular network is almost obsolete at this point. Most calls are done via the internet. You can also just use certain softwares to do most of your calls. And that way you're just in a better place. You're not running around with a phone and busy and hanging the phone like this and, being all stressed in your neck. So stop doing that. Instead, take all your calls in front of a computer, and you can be reached at any time during your office hours, for example. In the bedroom, I would say turn off the phones or airplane mode, or if they are open, put them as far away from your pillow as possible. If possible, charge them in the next room. If you charge them very close to the pillow, I would use the arm's length rule. And turn off the Wi-Fi also. So even if you still use Wi-Fi for different things, make sure that Wi-Fi router is turned off at night. There's no reason to use Wi-Fi when you are sleeping, of course. So some people prefer putting their Wi-Fi on a Christmas light timer, these outlet timers that can be automated. It's very practical. You set it, you forget it. And for some parents, it's a great way to stop the internet at a certain time for the teenagers or even younger children, that might sneak in some Wi-Fi in the middle of the night or something like that. And when you look at surveys, it's actually a large percentage of even children that are, I think, in primary school or a little bit older that are sneaking notifications in the middle of the night because they're keeping up with friends and everything is exciting. So it's also making us and our kids neurotic. So that's also a way to help them navigate technology that has been built as addictive. Everything is stacked against us these days. It's just the way it is. But something we talked about a lot during my summit interviews I told you about is going to come up next year. But it's really up to us as parents to set the boundaries for these technologies. And it's kind of I don't know if it's a sad role to play, but it's tedious, just like with food, but we have to do it. It's just the reality. And we see the kids where the parents are taking great care in limiting technology, using it in a healthier way, in an educative manner. The kids are just better. And the kids that are glued on the phone all the time at dinner, and it's too late sometimes, and it really impacts the way that they interact with the world. So I think that many parents listening to this are already up to this, but that's what I would say about technology. If you have other things that might emit EMFs in your bedroom, apply the same rules and try to turn it off. But that's mainly what I would say. And of course, I'm not a fan of, standing in your bed and the last thing you see before hitting the sack is your phone and notifications and things like that. So I prefer reading a book, but you do you. But in the end, it's a great habit to set where you try to limit technology 30 minutes before bed as well.
I love those. Those are fantastic tips. And yeah, we did that in our house too. We turned off the Wi-Fi. Once our kids got to high school, we actually made it 1 a.m. because sometimes they were up late working with papers. And it was earlier before then. We would all park our phones in the kitchen. Like, they weren't thrilled with that, but we always just parked them in there. And we just knew it was better for everyone. And I know our time is out, but I would love for you to send us those links for some of your favorite things that you've used to mitigate EMFs within the home and in the office. And we'll put links to those. I know two of my favorites that I use. And again, because I'm so sensitive, I notice that they are working. Whether the science and technology research has backed it or not, but things like the Soma Vedic I have at my home, and it neutralizes the space. It doesn't block it like a safe sleeve would with your phone. It just neutralizes our environment. I notice a huge relief in my energy when I use that. And then the other thing that I use that I travel with is the Aries Tech. I wear it, and where I was getting tons of headaches and from being in the Wi-Fi in the airplanes and blocking it as much as possible with my lamb's clothing that I would wear, I was still getting affected by it. And that has also helped. And we'll make sure to put links to those things as well. But Nick, thank you so much for what you do, for educating all of us on this really important part of our health that sometimes does not get is not in the news or is not at the forefront of what people are really looking at, but really need to. And so we're so grateful for all that you do to educate through your summits and everything else that you do. And we'll make sure I'll also put a link to your website.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I have to mention the work of so many scientists that come before me. I'm just reporting on their work. The only way we're going to get answers that are final and safety and the way we use technology is through their work. So I try to interview them, feature their work. And to me, I really stand on the shoulder of giants. And I'm trying just to make it a little bit simpler for people to understand, a little bit more down to earth. Sometimes it gets complicated. But just do your best, try to have EMFs as, okay, well, this is one of the long laundry list of things that I should minimize. And then do your best to get better over time. That's just like with food and other things like your laundry detergent and all these little things you have to think about these days.
Well, thank you so much. I completely agree. And until next time, thank you.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support our podcast, please subscribe and share it with others. Be sure to visit believebig.org to access the show notes and discover our bonus content. Thanks again and keep believing big.